Shortly before midnight on June 5, 1944, the sky over France split apart with a clap of thunder, but this wasn't the thunder of nature. It was the roar of 1,400 C-47 aircraft, carrying in their bellies 20,000 American plus British paratroopers. This was the harbinger of a storm, the vanguard of the largest invasion in human history. Their mission was to fall from the sky like avenging angels, to sink their teeth into the throat of the German war machine. They were meant to seize the bridges, the crossroads, to stop the Panzers from reaching the beaches where, at dawn, the slaughter was set to begin. In the first plane, leading the legendary 82nd Airborne Division, a slim, handsome officer stared out the window into the darkness, Brigadier General James Gavin. He was 37 years old. In a few minutes, he was about to become the first American general to jump into combat 10 miles deep inside enemy territory. His men had taken off from England a few hours earlier. Gavin knew they had only 8.5 minutes to exit the planes to land in the correct zone. He gave the order to stand up, to hook up. Then he looked out the window. His heart just sank. They were flying through the thickest fog he had ever seen. You couldn't see a thing, not even the wings of their own plane. The plane's door was opened. Then suddenly, the fog vanished. Gavin recalled that it disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. He could see Sainte-Mère-Église below. He thought it must have been the most dramatic moment of his life. A few seconds later, he roared the command to go. Then he was the first to leap into the darkness from an altitude of 600 feet. But for most of his division, this jump turned into a leap into hell. The 82nd Division flew into heavy anti-aircraft fire. The terrified transport pilots broke formation. The paratroopers were scattered all across the peninsula. Many landed 25 miles from their objective. Gliders smashed into hedgerows, sank in rivers. The losses were, honestly, horrific. 60% of all their equipment, mortars, radios, ammunition was lost. Hundreds of troopers, weighed down with gear, landed in the swamps the Germans had flooded, drowning in murky water that was less than 2 feet deep. General Ridgway himself, the division commander, found himself alone, a pistol in his hand in the middle of an unknown field. General Gavin landed miles from his zone in the marshes near the Murderette River, but Slim Jim didn't waste time on despair. He knew that at dawn, the Germans would figure out what had happened, then they would start hunting them. By 4 in the morning, he had gathered a small group of similarly lost troopers around him. He stood knee-deep in icy water while his men tried in vain to pull an anti-tank gun from a half-submerged glider. He had no idea where he was until his aide reported a railway embankment nearby. Gavin knew it was the Cherbourg-Carentan line. He felt a wave of relief. He was on the map. He led his band, which now numbered about 200 men, south toward the town of La Fière. There, he found another 300 paratroopers from different regiments just milling about aimlessly. Gavin instantly took command. He divided them. Half he left to capture the bridge at La Fière. The other half he sent to another bridge at Chef du Pont. Before we begin, I just want to say one thing. This channel tells the stories of people forged from steel and fire, not ordinary flesh and blood. Those who fought for our future deserve to be remembered. If you believe that too, please subscribe. Every video here honors their memory. I voice each story myself because they deserve a human voice, not a cold AI one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if your family went through that terrible war, share a few words about them. Let's remember them together. All right, let's get to the story. To understand who this man was, this man capable of turning chaos into order, a crowd of lost soldiers into a fighting force, you have to go back in time. James Gavin was born in Brooklyn in 1907. He was an orphan. He was adopted by a poor immigrant miner's family in Pennsylvania. He grew up in poverty, working from childhood to help the family. But a wild, unquenchable thirst for knowledge burned inside him. He read everything he could find, especially books about war. At 17, without even a full high school education, he ran away from home, enlisted in the Army. An old sergeant, seeing a spark in him, convinced him to try to take the entrance exams for West Point. It was, insane. A boy with an 8th grade education against graduates of the best schools. He would get up at 4:30 in the morning, study in the barracks latrines while everyone else slept. He devoured his studies, page by page. He passed. In 1929, he graduated from West Point, becoming an officer. When the war started in Europe, he became obsessed with a new revolutionary idea, the Airborne. He fought for a transfer to the new parachute school. In 1941, he got his wish. He showed an incredible talent for organizing, for training paratroopers. He rose through the ranks like a rocket. By 1942, he was already commanding the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a unit he had created himself. His baptism by fire came in Sicily in July of 1943, Operation Husky, the first mass nighttime airborne drop in American history. Just like in Normandy, it was complete chaos. Fierce winds scattered the planes all over the sky. Gavin jumped into the darkness, not even sure if he was over Sicily. He landed 60 miles from his objective, with only 20 men at his side, out of the 3,405 he had left Tunisia with. Again, chaos, uncertainty, despair. But Gavin didn't know the meaning of those words. He gathered his 20 troopers, then led them toward the sound of battle. Along the way, he collected other lost paratroopers like a magnet, attracting iron filings. His small army grew. It was a wild bunch. Engineers, cooks, clerks, signalmen. With this militia, he reached the Piazza Ridge. There they met them. The elite German Times Hermann Göring Panzer Division *, the Times Panzer Grenadiers *, supported by heavy Tiger tanks, plus artillery, were counterattacking to throw the American beachhead back into the sea. Any other commander, seeing this, would have retreated. But Gavin wasn't any other commander. He looked at his cooks, his clerks, then he looked at the approaching Tigers. He gave the order to attack. This was not just an order. It was madness. Absolute, pure, distilled madness. Colonel James Gavin, the man supposed to lead the world's best paratroopers into battle, now stood at the head of a wild, motley crowd. Cooks, clerks, signalmen, engineers, drivers, a few lost naval officers. This was not an army. This was the American people in all their fury. He led them in a frontal assault on professional, battle-hardened German Times, Panzer Grenadiers Times, dug in on the Piazza Ridge. The Germans, entrenched on the high ground, could not believe their eyes. They saw a disorganized mob running at them from the olive groves, firing everything they had, roaring like wild animals. They opened up a blistering fire with machine guns, with rifles. The first American scouts fell, cut down by the lead, but the mob did not stop. They fell, they got up, they kept running straight into the bullets. Right in the center of this human wave, a rifle in his hands, ran their general. The Americans fired so furiously, so continuously, that the Germans flinched for a moment. They were used to tactics, to maneuvers. They were not prepared for this primal, naked rage. They began to fall back. When the Americans, gasping for breath, finally clawed their way to the top of the ridge, the Germans were already withdrawing, leaving behind only empty shell casings, a few bodies. A brief, deceptive quiet fell. Gavin's soldiers, exhausted, dropped into the abandoned German foxholes trying to catch their breath. They had done it. They had, damn it, done it. A crowd of cooks, of clerks, had captured a fortified ridge, but the battle was just beginning. The Germans had not retreated because they were scared. They had retreated to unleash their true monsters. Suddenly, the earth began to tremble. At first, it was a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. Then a metallic grinding was added to it, a sound that made the blood run cold. The sound of steel tracks crushing the Sicilian soil. The Tigers were coming. From around a bend in the dusty road, 6 giant, clumsy silhouettes crawled into view. 6 Mark VI Tiger tanks. This was not just armor. It represented psychological terror. Each one was a steel fortress, armed with a deadly 88mm cannon that could penetrate any American tank from a mile away. But the paratroopers had their own wonder weapon, the bazooka, a light mobile rocket launcher that was supposed to be the tank killer. The bazooka teams moved forward. They let the Tigers get almost on top of them for a sure shot. They aimed for the vulnerable spots. They fired. Then the worst possible thing happened. The rockets, which were supposed to tear through armor, simply bounced off the thick hides of the Tigers like children's toys. They left only scratches. The Germans didn't even pay attention. One of the Tigers, like an annoyed elephant swatting a fly, just rolled over one of the American soldiers, crushing him into the ground. Machine gunners started jumping from the tanks, mowing down the confused bazooka teams before they could even reload. The Americans cursed. They screamed with helplessness, with rage. Their wonder weapon had proved useless. They were naked before these steel beasts. Gavin was alarmed. He saw his men starting to panic. He did the only thing he could. He led by example. He ran from foxhole to foxhole, under the whistle of bullets, the roar of tank engines, shouting, encouraging, firing his rifle. He was everywhere. He was the embodiment of their will to fight. He roared that they were staying on that damn ridge no matter what the hell happened. His voice cut through the din of battle. His men heard him. They stopped being a mob. They became an army again. The slaughter began. A few 81mm mortars started dropping rounds on the Germans. Airborne artillerymen rolled 2 light 75mm howitzers into direct fire positions, started blasting away at the tanks. The infantrymen, armed with only grenades, with courage, began to crawl toward the Tigers, trying to toss explosives onto the engine decks or under the tracks. The Tigers kept coming, their cannons blowing American positions to pieces. But the Americans clung to that ridge like bulldogs. They fired their bazookas at point-blank range, aiming for fuel tanks, for ammunition racks. One of the Tigers suddenly stopped, then began to reverse. Then 3 more exploded, one after another, turning into fireballs. Their crews burned alive. Gavin lay on the ground, firing his rifle like a madman. But the Germans kept throwing more tanks into the fight. They were massing for a final assault. At that moment, when it seemed all was lost, Gavin heard a new sound, a sound that was unmistakable. The gut-wrenching whistling sound of American 155mm shells flying overhead. He had sent a runner to the 45th Division headquarters. He had been heard. The ground shook as the heavy shells began to tear apart the German tanks, the infantry. The enemy attack faltered. The Tigers began to pull back. Then from over a hill came a new, joyful roar. It was the Shermans. 6 American tanks, a few half-tracks with anti-tank guns. Help had arrived. Cheers erupted all along the ridge. This was no longer a defense. It turned into a rout. The Shermans opened fire. The 155mm howitzers struck again. Gavin's paratroopers, tasting blood, surged forward. The Germans broke. They ran, leaving their dead, their wounded, tons of equipment on the field. The Piazza Ridge was theirs. Colonel Gavin was proud. His combat-untested paratroopers, his cooks, his clerks, had just smashed a battle group from the elite Times, Hermann Goering Times division. But the cost was high. 50 Americans lay dead on that rocky slope. That night, as they buried the fallen, General Gavin, a man who seemed to be made of steel, wept. The exhausted Colonel Gavin fell asleep in a shallow foxhole under an olive tree, right there on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of his own men plus the enemy's. When he woke on the morning of July 12th, to the hot Sicilian sun beating down on his face, he felt that one of his legs had gone stiff, was aching. He looked down. His lower leg was red, swollen. He had fought for hours, then slept, without even realizing he'd been hit by a piece of shrapnel. For any other officer, this would have been a ticket to the rear. A hospital, clean sheets, rest. But Gavin wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of being taken from the front. He knew an infection could take him out of the war for good, so he told no one. He found a medic station, made a medic pack the wound with sulfa powder, then just walked on. The pain was nothing compared to the fear of missing the war. He got in a jeep, drove to the other side of the battlefield, to the high ground of Piano Lupo. There, another part of his scattered paratroopers had stopped the western column of German tanks. The area was covered with bloated bodies. This was the price they had paid. Gavin had to see it. Then he drove to Gela. There, on a hill, he saw him. General George Patton, old blood and guts, stood in all his glory. A gleaming helmet with stars, cavalry breeches, boots polished to a mirror shine, the famous ivory-handled pistols on his belt. He looked like a god of war descended from Olympus. When Gavin, in his dirty, dusty uniform, a rifle in his hand, approached him, Patton just smiled. He greeted Gavin in his high, piercing voice, telling him that he, his boys, had done one hell of a damn fine job. Then he offered the young colonel a large flask of whiskey. This was the highest recognition from a man who was himself the embodiment of war. But while Patton praised them, the staff planners and the Allied command were already preparing their reports. They called the airborne phase of the Sicily invasion chaotic, unsuccessful, a failure. They saw only the mistakes, the scattered men, the lost equipment. They didn't see the most important thing, but the enemy saw it. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, would later state that the paratroopers had significantly delayed the movement of his troops, causing them heavy losses. General Kurt Student, the founder, the father of the German airborne forces, put it even more bluntly. In his opinion, if it weren't for the Allied airborne forces blocking the Times Hermann Göring Times division, that division would have thrown the initial sea landings back into the sea. His own generals criticized them. But the enemy, the best German commanders, they knew the truth. They knew they had encountered a new, incomprehensible, savage force. A force that, even when scattered to pieces, continued to fight to win. Very soon, that force was needed again. The next target was Italy itself. The Allies landed at Salerno. They immediately found themselves in hell. The Germans were waiting for them. They met the landing with a dense hurricane-like fire. Despite the full might of naval artillery, the Germans dug into the beachhead, driving a 2-mile wedge into the defenses, getting within 3 miles of the coast. By September 13th, the situation had become critical. General Mark Clark, commander of the 5th U.S. Army, realized he was about to be pushed into the sea. He sent an urgent message to Ridgway in Sicily. It wasn't a request, it was a cry for help. Ridgway didn't hesitate for a second. That very night, the paratroopers of the 504th Regiment jumped straight into the cauldron of battle. They landed on a narrow strip of land still held by the Americans. By dawn, they were already on the front lines. The following night, it was Gavin's turn. 120 C-47 aircraft broke through German flak, dropping his 505th Regiment onto the same beachhead. Again, by dawn, they were already in the trenches. The effect was immediate. The mere appearance of the paratroopers, these devils in baggy pants, boosted the morale of the despairing infantry. It broke the Germans. They were not prepared for elite, battle-hardened divisions to rain down on them from the sky. By the evening of September 15th, the German offensive had stalled. On September 18th, they began to retreat along the entire front. The 82nd Division had saved the day again. They didn't just hold the beachhead, they led the counterattack. Gavin's regiment broke through to the north, past the ancient ruins of Pompeii, in the shadow of Vesuvius. On September 30th, 1943, they entered Naples, the first major European city liberated by the Allies. For his exploits in Italy, 36-year-old James Gavin received his first star. He became a brigadier general, but he didn't celebrate for long. In November, he was summoned to England by General Eisenhower himself. He was appointed the lead American planner for airborne operations for the upcoming invasion of Northern Europe. The orphan boy from a mining town who had studied in latrines was now tasked with planning the largest airborne operation in human history. He knew that this time he wouldn't be jumping with a handful of men, he would be jumping with an entire army. He was preparing for D-Day. D-Day, June 6, 1944. After months of planning, of training, of waiting, General James Gavin was once again where he was meant to be, in the sky. In the belly of a roaring C-47, flying toward his destiny. He was not just a passenger, he was the tip of the spear. Behind him flew the entire 82nd Division, his all-Americans. Slim Jim knew their jump would be hellish. He just didn't know how much. When the green light flashed, he was the first to leap into the darkness. He immediately plunged into a slaughter. The sky over Normandy wasn't just black, it was red hot. It was boiling with tracer rounds. Thousands of German machine guns, flak cannons fired upwards, creating a solid, impenetrable wall of fire. The transport pilots, many of them green rookies, panicked. They broke formation, trying to evade, dropping their paratroopers anywhere just to get out of that hell faster. This was not an airborne assault, it amounted to a dispersal. Gavin landed far from his zone, in the marshes near the Murderet River. He was alone. The general commanding a division found himself by himself, a rifle in his hand, behind enemy lines. Any other army, any other general in that situation would be thinking about survival, about how to hide, to wait for his men. But Gavin wasn't any other general. He was an American. He didn't think about survival. He thought about attacking. He started moving. He started gathering his army. He used a child's toy cricket to tell friend from foe in the darkness. 1 click, a challenge. 2 in response, a friend. To that sound, from the darkness, from the swamps, from the ditches, men began to emerge, scared, confused, soaked to the bone, but alive, plus angry, incredibly angry. By 4 in the morning, he had gathered a small group. He stood knee-deep in icy water, while his men tried in vain to pull an anti-tank gun from a half-submerged glider. He had no idea where he was until his aide reported a railway embankment nearby. Gavin knew it was the Cherbourg-Carentan line. He felt a wave of relief. He was on the map. If you're on the map, you can fight. He led his band, which now numbered about 200 men, south toward the town of La Fière. There, he found another 300 paratroopers from different regiments just milling about aimlessly. It was a mob. In 5 minutes, Gavin turned it into a fighting force. He didn't ask what regiment they were from. He didn't ask their names. He just pointed to a target. He ordered them to go take a bridge, to go hold a crossroads. His voice, filled with an iron confidence, turned chaos into order. He divided them. Half he left to capture the bridge at La Fière. The other half he sent to another bridge at Chef de Pont. With the sunrise on June 6th, Gavin was no longer just a general. He was the leader of a wolf pack that he himself had assembled. He ran from bridge to bridge, personally directing the fight, organizing the defense, inspiring his men. They loved him. They respected him. They called him Grandma, because his first question to a soldier was often, "When's the last time you had a hot meal, son?" But in combat, he was no grandma. He was the devil. One of his soldiers recalled that he was a man who never had to raise his voice, that he led by example. Another said that wherever the fight was, wherever the soldiers needed to see, to hear him, that's where Gavin was. He was fearless. A reporter from Time remembered crawling in a ditch while bullets whizzed by. Gavin, with Ridgway, were calmly walking down the road. They yelled at him to get up, to walk like a man. One of the division's veterans said it simply: he could jump higher, shout louder, spit farther, fight harder than any man he had ever seen. His men were the same. They took the bridge at Chef du Pont after a fierce fight, but the bridge at La Fière became a real slaughterhouse. The Germans clung to it, understanding its strategic importance. The fight for that piece of land would last for 2 days. 2 days of hell. The paratroopers dug in around the bridges over the Murderette, the Douve rivers, held their ground. They were the shield that covered the rear of the 4th Infantry Division landing on Utah Beach. They fought with almost no sleep, no food, with minimal ammunition. The losses were horrific. On D-Day alone, the 82nd Division lost 1,259 men, killed, wounded, missing, but they held on. After the bridge at La Fière was finally taken, after the glider reinforcements descended from the sky, the 82nd Division went on the offensive. They pushed forward to cut off the entire Cotentin Peninsula. They fought continuously for 33 days. 33 days without rest, without rotation. When they were finally pulled from the line, the division had lost 57% of its personnel. In July of 1944, as they were loaded onto landing craft to return to England, exhausted, dirty, but unbroken, the 82nd Division had 5,245 men on its casualty list. But they had done their job. They had bitten into Fortress Europe, ripped a piece of land from its throat that became the beachhead for the liberation of an entire continent. General Gavin received another award for extraordinary heroism. In August, when Ridgway was promoted to command the 18th Airborne Corps, Gavin took his place. At 37, he became the youngest division commander in the U.S. Army. The orphan boy who had run away from home now led one of the most glorious divisions in history into battle. He was hungry for new fights. In August of 1944, having become the youngest major general to command a division, James Gavin was hungry for battle. He was not a staff planner moving flags on a map. He was a wolf. He wanted blood. But after 33 days of nonstop hell in Normandy, his all-American division was pulled back to England to rest. They licked their wounds, took on replacements, then waited. They waited for a new chance to jump on the enemy's throat. That chance came in September. Its name was Market Garden. It was a plan born of arrogance. British Field Marshal Montgomery, the prickly, self-assured victor of El Alamein, decided he could end the war with a single, lightning-fast blow. He planned to ignore the German Siegfried Line, to strike at the undefended underbelly of the Reich. The plan was audacious: to lay down a 50-mile carpet of paratroopers deep into Holland to seize key bridges. Then, along this carpet, to send the armored fist of the British 30th Corps, which was supposed to race 64 miles to the German border, reaching the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. It was soaked in arrogance. The British command dismissed intelligence reports. The Dutch resistance reported German tanks in the Arnhem area. Nonsense. Probably just old men, boys. Gavin's 82nd Division was given a central role. They were to capture the bridges over the Meuse River near Grave, the bridges over the Moss Wall Canal, most importantly, to hold the Grosbeek Heights overlooking the German border. The bridge at Nijmegen, though important, was lower on the priority list. This proved to be a fatal mistake. On September 17, 1944, the sky over England trembled. Over 1,500 transport planes, nearly 500 gliders took to the air. It was the largest airborne armada ever assembled for a single operation. Once again, just like in Sicily, just like in Normandy, General James Gavin was flying in the first plane. When the green light flashed, he coolly stepped out into space. He landed. He landed hard. So hard that he felt something crack in his back. He had broken 2 vertebrae, but he didn't know it yet. The adrenaline numbed the pain. He just got to his feet, gathered his men, then led them into battle, a general fighting with a broken back. Unlike the chaos in Normandy, this time the landing was almost perfect. His division landed with surgical precision. The Dutch, returning from church services, ran into the streets, waving, crying with joy. They were seeing their liberators. The Germans were seeing their end. General Kurt Student, commander of the German 1st Parachute Army, stood on the balcony of his headquarters, watching in horror as an endless stream of enemy planes filled the entire sky as far as the eye could see. Gavin's men worked like a machine. They didn't wait for orders. They knew what to do. Colonel Tucker's regiment, the 504th, landed on both sides of the giant bridge over the Meuse River, then seized it in a single rush. It became the most important achievement of the entire operation's first day. Gavin himself, despite the hellish pain in his back, led his men to the Grosbeek Heights, organized the defense, looking straight toward Germany, waiting for the inevitable counterattack. At night, he sent 2 companies into Nijmegen where, with the help of a Dutch guide, they snuck into the main post office, cut the wires leading to the explosives planted under the bridge. They saved the bridge, but couldn't capture it. The Germans had dug in deep. By the end of September 17th, it was clear Montgomery's audacious plan was starting to fall apart. To the north, in Arnhem, the British Red Devils had landed right on top of 2 SS Panzer divisions, were already fighting for their lives. In the center, near Nijmegen, Gavin's men had run into a wall of German defenses at the bridge. On September 19th, after 2 days of fierce fighting, the British General Horrocks, commander of the 30th Corps, arrived at Gavin's command post. His tanks had finally arrived, but they were stuck. They couldn't break through further north, to Arnhem, where British paratroopers were already dying by the hundreds. Gavin proposed a new plan, one as audacious as it was suicidal. He suggested crossing the wide, fast-flowing Wall River in small boats, hitting the Germans in the flank to capture the northern end of the bridge. Horrocks agreed. He promised to provide 33 plywood assault boats, but they would only arrive the next day. The task was assigned to the 3rd Battalion of the 504th Regiment under the command of Major Julian Cook. It was a one-way mission. The Wall River was 400 yards wide, had a swift current, was completely covered by German positions on the far bank. On September 20th, everything was ready. 30 British tanks lined up along the bank to provide fire support. The 82nd Division's artillery had zeroed in on the enemy positions. Finally, after endless delays, the boats arrived. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Major Cook gave the order. His men, grabbing the clumsy plywood boxes, rushed to the water. In that same instant, both banks of the river erupted. American-British artillery, plus the tanks, opened a hurricane of fire on the German positions. Under this fiery cover, the paratroopers pushed their boats into the water, started paddling. They paddled with the butts of their rifles. The Germans, recovering from the initial shock, returned fire with everything they had: machine guns, mortars, cannons. The water around the boats boiled with bullets. Men died, fell overboard. The boats were riddled with holes. Soldiers plugged them with handkerchiefs, bailed water with their helmets. Major Cook, standing in his boat under a hail of fire, alternated between shouting encouragement to his men, praying, "Hail Mary, full of grace." The wind shifted, blew away the protective smokescreen, leaving them completely exposed in the middle of the river, but they kept paddling. Of the 33 boats that started the crossing, 26 made it to the other side. Only 13 of them were fit for a return trip. The survivors, leaping onto the bank without seeking cover, charged forward. It was like an attack of zombies. Wet, furious, they ran across the open ground toward the dike where the Germans were dug in. They fought with rifles, with bayonets, with grenades. They carved up the German defense. The British General Browning, watching this, told Horrocks he had never seen a more gallant act. By evening, the bridge at Nijmegen was in Allied hands. But it was too late. The British tanks, having broken through the bridge, were stopped just a few miles from Arnhem. There, to the north, the battle had already been lost. Operation Market Garden had failed. Montgomery's arrogant plan ended in disaster. The British paratroopers at Arnhem were practically wiped out. Of the 10,000 Red Devils, just over 2,000 made it back. It was a glorious but devastating defeat. General Gavin was furious. He was furious seeing the British press try to portray this slaughter as a near victory. For him, a soldier, there were no nearlies. There was only victory or death. In Arnhem, his brothers in arms had died for nothing. After several weeks of fighting in Holland, the two American airborne divisions, exhausted, battered, but unbroken, were finally pulled back to camps near Reims in France. They were supposed to rest, to heal, to get replacements. They thought the war for them was over for a while. In October, Gavin received his second star. He became a major general. His chest was adorned with medals: American, British, Dutch, French, Belgian, even Soviet. His division received a Presidential Unit Citation, but Gavin didn't want medals. He wanted to fight. He didn't know that the most terrible battle of his life was still ahead. The evening of December 17, 1944, General Gavin was having dinner with his staff officers when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was filled with alarm. The Germans, the day before, they had broken through the front in the Ardennes. The situation was critical. The 18th Airborne Corps was to be ready to move within 24 hours. Gavin was not a man who waited 24 hours. He was a man of action. He immediately gave orders, put the 101st Division on alert, put his All-Americans on alert. But a moment later, another call came. The situation wasn't just critical, it was catastrophic. The Corps had to move immediately. Their objective, the strategic city of Bastogne in Belgium. The Corps commander, General Ridgway, was in England. Gavin, as his deputy, took command. He did what he did best. He turned chaos into action. While his paratroopers frantically drew weapons, ammunition rations, Gavin jumped in a jeep, sped to the 1st U.S. Army headquarters. There in Spa, he learned just how bad things were. The 1st Army, which had taken the brunt of the German offensive, was crumbling. Gavin was ordered to have his 82nd Division take up defensive positions near Werbemont, north of Bastogne, to cover the northern flank of the breakthrough. The 101st was to go directly into Bastogne to hold the city at all costs. Gavin met the lead columns of his division as they entered Werbemont on the evening of December 18th. They set up roadblocks, organized the defense. That night, Ridgway arrived, took command of the Corps. At dawn on December 19th, news came that made the blood run cold. German tanks had cut the road leading south to Bastogne. The situation was dire. The few American units in Streetvith in Bastogne were holding on, but by December 20th, both towns were completely surrounded. The Germans were forced to divide their forces. Their offensive began to weaken. Then the legend began. While the 101st Division, the Screaming Eagles, under the command of General McAuliffe, heroically held Bastogne, entering history with their famous "nuts" reply to the German ultimatum to surrender, Gavin's men were fighting an equally brutal, though less famous, battle to the north. When American armored units were driven out of Streetvith, the full force of the German blow fell on the 82nd Division. The 504th Parachute, the 325th Glider Regiments fought stubbornly to the last round against the Germans who had broken through. They refused to retreat. Colonel Tucker's regiment, the 504th, earned its 2nd Presidential Unit Citation for its incredible resilience, but the Germans kept pushing. They threatened to break through at an isolated but critically important crossroads near the village of Barak de Fratcher. Gavin, realizing that if this crossroads fell, the entire flank would collapse, threw everything he had at it. A company of glider infantry to support the motley group of tankers, infantrymen already holding there, another battalion to a neighboring town. They arrived on the morning of December 22nd. They immediately ran into the vanguard of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, elite versus elite. The Americans, facing overwhelming enemy numbers, withstood an artillery barrage. Then, an attack by tanks, Panzer Grenadiers, they held on for over an hour. Then, they were simply crushed. Of the 116 glider infantrymen sent to that crossroads, only 44 managed to escape, the rest were killed or captured. After this battle, on Montgomery's orders, the 82nd Division fell back a few miles to the north to more defensible positions. Gavin's paratroopers cursed the order to withdraw, but their fighting spirit was not broken. They blew up bridges, mined roads, strung barbed wire. By Christmas morning, everything was ready. The German counteroffensive had bled out in the snowy forests of the Ardennes. On December 26th, the surrounded Bastogne was relieved. The next day, December 27th, von Rundstedt threw his last reserves into the fight. The 9th SS Panzer Division, the 62nd Times Volksgrenadier Times Division, launched a final desperate attack on the positions of Gavin's All-Americans. The German infantry, shouting battle cries, firing from the hip, attacked the paratroopers east of the village of Manhay. One American battalion was overrun, but the rest held. When they saw the giant silhouettes of tigers, of panthers crawling out of the woods, the American soldiers did something that seemed insane. They just ducked down in their foxholes, let the tanks roll over them. When the tanks had passed, they stood up, engaged the infantry following behind. Gavin threw his last reserve into the fight. The Americans fought with the fury of the doomed. The Germans couldn't take it. They retreated. Some of the captured German soldiers later said they had never before seen Americans fight so tenaciously. On January 3, 1945, the Allies went on the counteroffensive. Gavin's men were at the tip of this assault. They pushed through deep snow, bitter cold. They broke through the dragon's teeth of the Siegfried Line. On the night of February 2nd, they were on German soil. After that, they were moved to the Hurtgen Forest sector, a place that had become synonymous with a senseless World War I-style slaughter. On February 17th, exhausted to their limits, they were finally pulled to the rear. The Battle of the Bulge had been won. The 82nd Division had paid its price for it. But they had proven, once again, where it's toughest, where it's hell, you will always find General Gavin's All-Americans. After the hell of the Hurtgen Forest, they were finally pulled to the rear. The 82nd Division, exhausted to the limit, returned to Reims. They thought the war was over for them. They thought they had earned a rest. But the war wasn't finished with them yet. In April of 1945, after a brief respite, they were thrown back into the fight. The final push, they crossed the Elbe River. The enemy's resistance was no longer a battle, but an agony. These were not army units. They were packs of desperate, starving men trying to escape the horror approaching from the east. From the Red Army, on May 2nd, 1945, a scene occurred that perfectly summarized the entire career of General James Gavin. He received a message that the German 21st Army Group wanted to surrender to him. Not a battalion, not a regiment, an entire army group. Gavin drove to the meeting place. When he arrived, he saw a perfect picture of the old aristocratic Prussian military tradition. Lieutenant General Kurt von Tippelskirch, in a flawless gray uniform with red collar tabs, an iron cross at his neck, was waiting to surrender his army. He asked where the commanding general was. He was directed to a man standing on a street corner. This man was dressed in a faded, dirty paratrooper's jumpsuit, and Monet rifle was slung over his shoulder. He looked like any other tired GI. The only thing that gave him away were the two small stars on his collar, on his helmet. This was Major General James Gavin. The German general looked at him with unconcealed disdain. He looked me over. Gavin recalled saying I was too young, didn't look like a general. It only took a moment to change his mind. In that instant, two worlds collided. The world of old, aristocratic wars, where generals moved armies like pieces on a chessboard. The new, American world, where generals jumped out of planes ahead of their men, accepted the surrender of entire armies with a rifle on their shoulder. After the war ended, Gavin's division was sent to occupied Berlin. He became the American representative on the city's command council. But even there, amidst the ruins of the defeated Reich, he couldn't sit still. On Sundays, despite the pain in his broken back, he would go to Tempelhof Airfield, go parachuting. To blow the cobwebs out of my head, he'd say. In 1946, he returned home a hero. His All-Americans led the victory parade in New York City. The crowd roared. America hailed its heroes. He stayed in the army, he climbed the career ladder, eventually becoming the army's deputy chief of staff, but he never became a staff planner. He remained a soldier. When he saw the politicians in the Eisenhower administration trying to save money, start to cut the army, reducing divisions, betting on nuclear weapons, he rebelled. He knew that future wars would be not total but local. They required not a giant nuclear club but a fast, mobile, flexible army. He developed the concept of air mobile forces, an idea that would later be embodied in the helicopter assaults in Vietnam. But at the time, no one listened to him. He became a rebel. In 1958, unwilling to watch silently as the army he loved was dismantled, he resigned. He explained that he decided he could better serve his country by freeing himself from the constraints, telling the American people the truth. His ideas were so revolutionary that a young senator named John Fitzgerald Kennedy noticed them. When Kennedy became president, he appointed Gavin as ambassador to France. His concept of airmobile forces became the foundation of the new American army. When the Vietnam War began, Gavin, unlike many generals, spoke out against it. He called it a catastrophe. He saw the army being destroyed from within because they were sending officers there just to get promoted. He, a true warrior, hated to see soldiers' lives wasted in a senseless war. He lived a long, full life. He raised 5 daughters, wrote books, played tennis, painted pictures. But to the very end, to his death in 1990, he remained the same. Slim Jim. A soldier. A rebel. A legend. A man who showed the entire world that to defeat elite panzer divisions, sometimes all you need is a handful of clerks, one American general to lead them into battle. The story of General Gavin is proof that one man, filled with fury, with determination, can change the course of history. These are the legends this channel exists to tell. Write in the comments which of General Gavin's actions impressed you the most. The attack on the Tigers with cooks, the jump with a broken back, or his courage to stand up to politicians after the war. The memory of such men is alive as long as we speak of them, but this story is not the end. Right now, 2 more legends are appearing on your screen. 2 incredible tales of men forged from steel, from fire. If you have the time, dedicate it to the memory of more heroes. Thank you for watching.